Hey, right, bit of an oddball video this one. Now, as you know, I hit the 100,000 subscriber mark a couple of months ago, and I promised that I was going to do an unboxing of my silver play button when it arrived. And a few people have been asking in the comments, sort of, what's happened to that video? Are you still intending to do it? Have I missed it? You know, what's going on with it? Well, actually, I do have my silver play button now, although there was a bit of a delay in me getting it. I've not had it that long. But about 3.5, 4 years ago, I promised myself that when I reached that special goal of 100,000 subscribers, I was going to celebrate, I was going to reward myself with something to mark the occasion. The problem is that special something isn't readily accessible. In fact, I first registered my interest in it almost 2 years ago. And even though I've been sort of squirreling money away in my partner's account for 3.5 years now in order to finance it, it's not something that I could just make happen once, you know, the 100,000 subscriber point was reached and my silver play button arrived. Now, when I was filming this B-roll last week, I'd sort of got a hint from the company involved that this particular item, its availability might be imminent. Now, I'm going to put you out of your misery. It's not another motorcycle, it's a watch, and it's actually a very special watch to me. I've always had an interest in watches, and I think since the early 1990s, this is a particular model that I've always coveted. And I wanted to sort of share the experience of receiving it with you as part of the unboxing of my silver play button. Now, while I was doing this ride, I started thinking about Royal Enfield, because to me, and I know to a lot of other people, it has a special sort of magic or mojo that's difficult to define as a brand. Royal Enfield, for me, somehow stands head and shoulders above all other motorcycle manufacturers. And though I've tried to express this feeling or this notion in previous videos, I've always felt afterwards that somehow I'd come up short. So while I was doing this ride, the question popped into my head, you know, another way of looking at it. If Royal Enfield were a manufacturer of luxury timepieces, which of the most well-known brands would it be? You know, where would it fit in that list of prestigious sort of entry-level luxury brands? I think what prompted this is that about 3 years ago I made a video about modern classic motorcycles and what the attraction is, and I likened them to mechanical watches. And I can't remember exactly what I said in that video now, but even to today I still get comments from people that have watched that video and they completely get it. They identify with that concept, in that although we all have readily available to us cheap methods of telling the time, electronic methods, mechanical watches are making a comeback because people are tired of cheap throwaway electronic. And likewise, we've had a huge growth in the modern classic segment of the motorcycle industry because it's become pretty much the same, although it's not cheap. Motorcycles have all become quite generic and dominated by electronics. They've deviated away from, you know, the basic motorcycling experience that we all love. The love of classic motorcycles or modern classic motorcycles and the resurgence in mechanical watches is based on sentiment. It's not based on fact or practicality. It's based on sentiment. And although perversely it is a modern trend in itself, it's based on a rejection of modern trends, a rejection of that rat race that, you know, every consumer product has become. You know, this year model is better than last year's model because it's got this electronic gadget, it can go faster, it's more powerful, it has traction control and raid modes that take away the responsibility of you having to adapt to the road conditions, tyre pressure sensors, heated hand grips, the list goes on. And although I know a lot of people buy into that and they appreciate all these electronic gizmos, a lot of us realise that it just doesn't really enrich your life. It doesn't really enhance your riding experience. It just pushes up the cost of the motorcycle that you own. Now, I wouldn't say it's the only attraction to me, but one of the attractions with the Royal Enfield brand is that for decades it's been the underdog of the motorcycle world, and I'm a sucker for supporting the underdog. Regarded by most motorcyclists as that quirky brand that's been building the same motorcycle for 70 years. Poor quality, unreliable, and definitely not to be taken seriously if you're a real motorcyclist. And to be honest, up until around about 2009, 2010, there was a lot to that sentiment. A lot of that was true. They were huge in India, but no one in the Western world really took them seriously. From 2010, under new stewardship of Siddhartha Lal, Royal Enfield did start to make some inroads to sort of mainstream Western motorcycle consumership. It was slow work. But then in 2018, 2019, they hit the jackpot. Now, I was running this channel then, and I remember having conversations with people who said, oh, they look cheap, they look nasty, they look unfinished. We're talking about the Interceptor and the Continental GT here. Yeah, this is all going to fall flat on its face, but I saw something really different to what their eyes were seeing. I saw a basic but good-looking machine that provided me with everything that I craved from a motorcycle and didn't force upon me anything that I didn't want in a motorcycle. Yeah, it had ABS braking, but that's a legal requirement. I'm sure Royal Enfield would probably have left that out if they could. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's clear to everyone even now, but Royal Enfield's brand ethos is just to offer the customer pure, uncomplicated motorcycling and nothing else. Where I think other brands have gone wrong when I look at the likes of BMW and Triumph, both of whom have been reasonably successful with their modern classic motorcycles, is that they've tried to hedge the bets. They've brought out a modern classic motorcycle, but then they've crammed into it as many electronic interventions as they could think of, thinking that that will attract customers. They're trying to appeal, if you like, to both mentalities. Now, as you know, I bought into Triumph motorcycle ownership in 2016, having come from BMW ownership, the big GSs, and I've got to admit, for me, it didn't feel like a huge step, because although I was stepping down or sideways into a modern classic, which is what I craved, it still had a lot of the electronic interventions that I was used to with the BMW, and I paid the hefty price tag for the privilege. But like with the BMWs, I found that I very rarely used the heated grips. Apart from trying it out on the first few days of ownership, I never used the different road modes. I had no use for traction control because I knew how to control a throttle. I rarely used the cruise control because our roads are so cluttered that 99% of the time the road conditions dictate that it's not really safe to use it. After that, I was one of the first people to take on an Interceptor here in the UK, and I've never looked back. 4 years on, I still love it, and I would never change it. But coming back to the underdog thing, despite the immense success of Royal Enfield over the last 4 or 5 years, because they are starting to dominate the market in most countries. Even now, many publications malign the brand. The heritage of the brand is often diminished by authors sort of stating or making a very clear distinction between the Indian Royal Enfield and the original Redditch Royal Enfield. There was a change of ownership, therefore it's not the same company. This company only started up in 1954. When you look at the fortunes of Triumph and BMW, these facts are rarely mentioned, and if they're mentioned at all, they're mentioned as being of no consequence. The fact that BMW's changed ownership several times in its lifetime, the things that it's credited with as developing, you know, the Boxer twin engine, the cardan shaft, the telelever front suspension, inventions that authors always give credit to BMW for, are nothing of the sort. The Boxer twin engine was stolen from Douglas, a British company. The cardan shaft and the telelever suspension was stolen from French manufacturers. But the credit for the invention of the rear swing arm suspension cannot be given to Royal Enfield because that was created by the original Royal Enfield, not the Indian Royal Enfield. Something that pretty much every motorcycle in the world now uses. Thinking about Triumph, you know, the motorcycle media routinely refers to it as a company that goes back to 1902. They never mentioned that it changed hands several times up until the 1980s, then went bankrupt and changed hands again, then went bankrupt again, was out of production for almost a decade, and then was bought and resurrected by a property developer. This history rarely, if ever, gets mentioned. Almost every well-known brand in the business world today has a similar history that's frequently glossed over, but the motorcycle publications always make this very clear distinction between the Indian Royal Enfield and the original Redditch Enfield. I'm not going to speculate in this video why that might be. Now, the other thing that Royal Enfield have done is they've read the future. They know what is going on in the world with personal transport, and they have future-proofed their machines to fit in that world. There is nothing more boring than trying to drive a high-powered, high-speed machine at 20 miles an hour, or 30 miles an hour, or 40 or 50 miles an hour, constantly having to keep tabs on your speed. This is the new reality of driving on the roads of the UK and Europe. As for other countries, it may not have reached you yet, but it will in time. With speed cameras around every corner, and new equipment due to be fitted to motor vehicles that will report your riding behaviour, having a machine that is capable of travelling at anything over the highest permitted speed limit of your country is totally pointless. Yet, these manufacturers are still doing it. They're still turning out machines that will do 120, 130 miles an hour. Now, as I commented in a video a week or so back, even the Interceptor is now starting to feel a little bit irrelevant on modern roads because it's capable of travelling a lot faster than you are typically allowed to travel. There's no doubt that should it go ahead, and it's looking like it will go ahead, when electric vehicles become mainstream, finding fuel at an affordable price is going to become a bit of a challenge. So modestly powered machines that can travel up to the speed limit but not exceed it whilst sipping fuel in small quantities is going to be the machine that's in demand. A lot of riders have already cottoned on to this, and they're making the shift to brands like Royal Enfield. Royal Enfield is way ahead of the competition in that game. They don't put their efforts, although they're perfectly capable of doing it if they want to, into producing high-powered machines. Relatively high-powered, small-capacity motorcycles might appeal to a 17-year-old, but they're not pleasant motorcycles to ride. The novelty soon wears off, but by the time he's 20, he's going to be looking for something a little bit more grown-up and refined, something with character. And again, building character into motorcycles, especially as far as the engine is concerned, is something that Royal Enfield is very good at. A motorcycle with a pleasant, endearing character is a motorcycle that a rider can bond with. A bond that the rider is unlikely to ever want to break. And then we come to model choice. Many manufacturers put their eggs all in one basket. They'll have a plethora of different versions of one model, a modern classic, and then a handful of verging on the unrealistic, high-powered contemporary machines. Royal Enfield have gone in a completely different direction. Yeah, they've got the likes of the Scram 411 and the Himalayan, which arguably are contemporary machines, but they're not high-powered, although we'll see what happens when the 450cc liquid-cooled version comes on the market. And then the rest of the models are all modern classics, but there's a difference. We have the 350 Meteor and the 650 Super Meteor, which fit into a bracket circa 1990s. Bikes that will appeal to a certain demographic. Then we have the Hunter 350, the Interceptor and the Continental GT 650s, styled on bikes from the early 1960s up to the early 1970s, which appeal to a completely different demographic. Then of course we have the humble classic 350, the continuation of a model that has been the longest continually produced motorcycle in history, which again appeals to yet another demographic. They've pretty much covered every single motorcycle demographic for maximum sales. They haven't just concentrated on a narrow niche. They've covered just about every single motorcycle demographic base, with yet more models to be released. And all these models have been designed and developed with a new manufacturing facility which allows them pretty much to manufacture them all side by side on the same production line as demand dictates, which gives you a huge advantage over other manufacturers who might get other manufacturers to assemble the smaller capacity bikes for them. Because doing it this way means that your entire profit goes in your pocket and you have complete control over cost and the manufacturing process. It also prevents devaluation of your brand and prevents its perceived value from being diluted in the eyes of your customers. And the final bit of magic for this brand is accessibility. These bikes can literally be serviced at the roadside by their owners with not much more than the onboard toolkit. The disadvantage of high-powered small capacity machines is that they are complicated and expensive to service. Unless you are a very talented DIY home mechanic, in the long term they're going to be expensive to run. And that's something that Royal Enfield has completely dialed out of the equation with all their motorcycles to date. Now, going back to that original question that I asked myself on this ride, if Royal Enfield was a premium watch brand, which watch brand would it be? And three brands came to mind because they all have well-known timepieces that fall within the sort of same price category of most Royal Enfield motorcycles, round about the £5,000 to £7,000 price bracket. Tudor, Omega and Rolex. Now, I discounted Rolex almost immediately, although I was contemplating more their steel sports models, which, usually fit within that sort of price bracket. Quite conservative timepieces, really, something that, Rolex is renowned for, conservatism of design, when it comes to its sports models, that is. In some ways, these do fit in with the Royal Enfield brand, except for one thing, and that is brand perception, and that's down to the exquisite finishing of their timepieces. I wanted the Royal Enfield to be a Rolex, but it's not really. They're a little bit, and I don't know whether this is the right choice of words, they're a little bit more honest than a Rolex. A bit more basic, more of a road tool. A Royal Enfield isn't intended to wow, it's just intended to impress. And then I considered Omega, a very famous brand, not quite at the same level as Rolex, and as a result of that, in a lot of ways, they sort of try too hard. Many of the well-known models are a little bit overcomplicated with their coaxial escapements and their twin spring barrel arrangement. Complicated and unnecessary technology that is supposed to bring benefits, but in comparison to the competition, those benefits are not evident. Accuracy and consistency is about the same, but servicing tends to be a little bit more expensive. They spend an awful lot of money on advertising. And the more I think about this brand, the more they remind me of Triumph. This additional technology puts pressure on the manufacturing process, and quality control isn't all that it should be for a watch costing £5,000, £6,000 or £7,000. They're designed to do just one thing, tell you the time, but quite often they're unable to even align the hands on the dial correctly, something which annoys a lot of owners and isn't always sorted out by Omega under warranty. And like Triumph, although they turn out some beautiful products, you sometimes feel as though they're overcompensating a bit in order to try and keep up with the competition, the nearest competition being Rolex. They end up being a little bit too showy, a little bit too much in your face, with too much money and attention put into making them look pretty rather than put into making sure that they're built properly. A problem that does come up from time to time with Triumph. Now, last year, my partner had a landmark birthday. She was 21 for the 29th time, and she told me that she would like a nice watch to commemorate this landmark birthday. Now, what she finally decided on was a Tudor Black Bay 58, and I would wager a lot of you have never heard of the Tudor brand. Now, I think the brand name was first registered in the 1920s. I might not have got that right, but they didn't actually start building them until 1947. And it was a brand instigated by a man called Hans Willdorf, the same man that founded the Rolex brand. He believed that Rolex was a great success, but they were too expensive for most people, so he brought out the Tudor brand to give Rolex quality at an affordable price for people that couldn't justify or afford to buy a Rolex. And for the most part, these were Rolex models simply sold under the Tudor name, with a high quality and reliable movement, but not a Rolex movement, which meant that they could be sold at a much more reasonable price. Now, Tudor did okay in the day, but in the 1990s, its fortune started to fade. A lot like Royal Enfield, still owned by the Hans Willdorf Foundation, the owner of Rolex, and it is, in fact, today still the sister brand to Rolex. It was sort of put on a back burner while Rolex restructured itself and to get it into the position that it's in the marketplace now. And then in 2010, sort of like Royal Enfield, it was relaunched and completely reinvented itself as a premium watch brand. And the model that propelled it back to watch stardom, if you like, was the Black Bay, a heritage model that harks back to the early 1950s Submariner. A sort of modern classic version of one of its original watches. Now, this isn't a copy of something that Rolex did, because Tudor had access to those designs and used those designs in tandem with Rolex. They were just sold under the Tudor name. Now, like Royal Enfield, Tudor have chosen to change the name, but they've kept the same ethos as one of their original models. And in the world of watches, Tudor is now one of the most respected watch brands. Very high quality, very well finished, but there are no frills timepiece. Like at Royal Enfield, they're very tool-like. They give you just what you need in a high quality premium timepiece, but no more. They don't buy cheaper movements in from other manufacturers anymore. They build their own, just like Royal Enfield build their own engines. In essence, like Royal Enfield, they're a high quality, no frills, premium machine that garners respect from everybody in a genuine vintage reissue that is both relevant and faithful to its own heritage. Now, she loves her Black Bay, and actually I love it, but it's just a bit too small for me. It looks great on her, but it looks like I've got a Mickey Mouse watch on if I try it on. So I did warn you that this was a bit of an oddball video, just an example of my thought processes when I'm riding. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to indulge me and watch my videos. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. And don't forget to hit the notification bell and ensure that your notifications are enabled. I've been looking at my analytics lately, and only about 4% of subscribers are actually being sent notifications when I upload a new video, which is a shame. I will, of course, be back next week with that special sort of presentation silver play button unboxing video, so try not to miss that. In the meantime, if you're riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.